good afternoon. Hi, I'm so happy to see you. It's Dr. Robin Gould, and here we are on lamnetwork.tv, where you can find all kinds of different programming about the Torah and the Torah walk, Torah life, and I'm so happy that you're here. And so we have a lot to cover today. We'll just jump right on in because we only have a little less than an hour, really is like the way I like to kind of crunch that in. So let's just start. So my website is newcovenantpath.com. If you ever need to reach me through any other means, that's there. And remember, as I always say every week before we launch into what we're talking about, the future begins now. And everything that we are going to learn, whatever's true, is going to transform us, is going to change our lives, which is going to shift the entire matrix of our destiny in the way that we are walking toward what we're born for. And I really pray that that's your attitude and that's your belief, because I'm a forward thinker, and I think that there's value in that. There's very much value in being a now thinker, and I do strive more and more for that as time goes on and as I mature to kind of embrace the now. But anyway, so the future begins now. So I am trying to embody both of these concepts. It's not as easy as it sounds, and maybe you already know that. Okay, so here we go. The Torah portion this week, it's called Vayera, and it goes from Genesis 18:1 through 22:24. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, if you're new to this, the Torah portion is just the Torah segmented into, into portions that the entire faith community, joins in all year, and it just restarts every year. And it's kind of neat. We can stand in solidarity with each other. We can be together, all on the same page and studying the same thing. And I think that's part of just being that broader community, as we are in the dispersion and we're far away from other believers. And particularly now in this season of history where there can be a lot of isolation going on and a lot of feeling very separate. I know a lot of people are struggling with that. And this helps, right? So the Torah portion, following the Torah portion. So we're not covering the whole Torah portion, but what I want to call today is that what I want to talk about today is I want to, and this is for me, if not more than it is for you today. And the question is that I want to kind of address today is, what are we expecting? What are you expecting? So there's a lot of different views on expectation driving reality, okay? Creating reality, whatever. Now, there's a lot of different angles from which some concepts form. Like, there are people that believe that we create realities with our expectations, like actually create them. Now, I don't believe that. I believe a form of that, though. I believe that our expectations will dictate, I don't like that word, but will impact or drive our behavior. And our behavior, as we walk down whatever path we choose, is going to each fork in the road that we take. We're going to take this, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, is going to have a result and an outcome. And our expectations, in many ways, you can expect to hate something or think something's horrible or be sick or not feel well. And of course, the stress chemistry your body produces in that negative anticipation, yes, can create illness, can create bad moods or whatever. Okay, so I really do believe in a lot of that. But expectation from the paradigm I want to approach is from an attachment perspective. And if you know anything about me, and if you've seen any of my programs, I'm an attachment specialist. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and that's my bent. So I always come from an attachment lens. I look at the Bible, I look at God, I look at the faith family in the Bible, I look at our faith family from an attachment perspective. Now, that's a really hard, difficult way to look at the world. It's also the only way, I believe, to look at the world. And I think it's a really easy way to look at the world. So it's kind of encompasses all these things, because attachment gives us understanding and, I believe, wisdom, and helps us understand the weight of your matter. But at the same time, you look around and you see how many people and how many systems in play don't understand attachment. And that's sad and hard. Okay. It's hard to know what people choose to not be aware of or are not aware of, just genuinely not aware. So, attachment, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I believe it's the truth. And I believe that the way to approach the Bible is through an attachment lens with our Father, and that all the laws of the Torah are designed from a parent to a child, in creating systems of family unit, worshiping and following and obeying and trusting the Father. Now, this is a unique relationship we have with the Father, because as we love our neighbor as ourselves, we don't worship our neighbor, we worship the Father, right? But we love the Father because he loved us first, which is an attachment principle, just period, because he's our primary caregiver. When I mean primary, I mean he is the caregiver, right? He is the caregiver. And he's appointed certain groups of people to be, shepherds in that system, but he's the primary caregiver. So, what are we expecting from our caregiver? Our expectation is going to drive our belief and our biases and our proclivities and our default settings and all that. And we know this, right? What are we expecting? Now, one of the things that can happen to people that are new in the Torah, right? They realize that, and it talks about reading the Bible through a seared conscience, nothing in, nothing out. It's like you don't even learn. You just read and you just think you already know the end of the story. So you don't even listen to the story or understand the story or put it together in any way. You just think you already know. And then all of a sudden you figure out, oh, the Torah is relevant for today. I need to reread this. And we realize how much we read not reading. We just were trying to fill in blanks until we got to what we thought we were being told. Well, we miss so much. When somebody's trying to tell you a story and you think you know what they're going to tell you, you're not listening to the story. You're waiting for it to match what you expect. And that's not listening. Okay, you're missing so much information along the way. And as a marriage and family therapist, this is something that I encounter in my work. Like I would do work with people, and maybe one person would be talking and the other person would be already shaking their head. The person hadn't even finished making their point. The other person's shaking their head, which tells me they're not listening. They're not open. They're not saying, I'm curious about this person because I might learn something I don't know about them that would help me be better in this relationship. But they're not doing that. They're already sure of what they're going to hear. And the other person can tell, and they hold back. And so this is a circuitous problem that it's extremely difficult to sometimes to break those patterns. So I have to jump in and, hey, let's listen, okay? And it's really hard to listen. Listening is really hard because we want to talk and we want to make a point. We want to be heard and we want to be understood and we want to be validated. But sometimes, what we need is we need correction and we need direction and we need to listen. And we're not going to come to this information. The allergies are starting. We're not going to come to this information in the echo chamber of our own head. Okay. We have to be wrong. We have to get that we're wrong. Now, I think when people that came from a faith system that didn't embrace the Torah, and then they start embracing the Torah, they go through this really treasure time. Like I call this the treasure hunt time. It's when you are so excited to be wrong about so many things. Because once you say, okay, I get dispensationalism is not true. It doesn't make sense. There's no logos to this. It's just weird. And I just went in a dispensational direction, thinking this was right, and it didn't make sense, and I had to do these acrobats in my head to make it fit, and I no longer do that. Well, then you shift into this new, you're a Hebrew, right? You've crossed over. You shift into this new mindset. But then you're still getting these echoes of the past, like, yeah, but in Galatians, what about Colossians? And you get a little panicky, right? You're like, oh, maybe this whole shift is wrong. And you start feeling unsteady on your feet and you can't wait to find out how you used to be wrong. And you're like, thank you. Okay, because I've chosen this path, I'm walking on this path, and now I need to know all the errors of my ways in the past of the way I understood this, and I'm going to embrace and celebrate this. This is exciting. I want this to be true. Now that's a treasure, because correction protects you. You feel safe as you're corrected, and you're more excited than ever to say, oh, I misread that the whole time. It's like, I am so happy to learn about what I didn't know. I'm learning about the Father from a new angle, from a new way of understanding what he's saying and what it means to the people. And this is an exciting time. This is like a rejuvenating time in our spiritual life. Now, in a lot of ways, it's a difficult time because people around us, they often won't embrace that. They will be like, no, no, these people were given this law by this wrath driven God. And now we've got, nice Jesus has come to save us from God. And they don't realize that's kind of how that comes across, but really we are, can be lonely, really feel lonely as we're making that transition. And we do have to learn to trust in the Father and the Father alone. And a lot of people, you understand what I'm saying. You go down this path and it can be pretty lonely and pretty thorny. It can be hard. It also can be amazing if you have a group of people and you just keep getting excited about what you're learning. Now, I personally had that. I had people at first, years ago. I think this was like, I think I was 2004. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was 2003, 2004. And there was really nothing much. But then when I found people, we had a great time studying and it was so exciting. And I never opened my Bible in like terror that I would be wrong. I opened it curious as to how I would be wrong. And I was fine with it. And that is a treasure, my friend, because that shows attachment, right? That's attachment. So let's go into something about what we're expecting and how it applies, I believe, to the portion. And we're just going to talk a little bit about part of the portion. We're a quarter of the way through. You see how quick this goes. And I'm just giving you my introduction here, but I want to remind you, God knows your birthday. Okay. He knows the day you were born. If you're alive during this season of life, which is by any accounts, by any perspective, a very challenging, unique phase of life, right? Like we are not, I'm not saying everybody really expects this, right? And a friend of mine told me, said a couple months, and it really kind of struck me. And she said, God knows my address. Like if I'm living here and I'm here and this is where I am right now and this is where I feel like I need to be, God knows I'm here. Because a lot of people are thinking, where should I go? What should I do? Okay. So let's gather in some comfort here. And I'm saying this to myself. God knows my birthday. God knows my address. He knows where I am. He knows how old I am. He knows that I was born for a time such as this. My children, who are not raised for this kind of an environment, my adult sons, I've raised them, based on the rules I understood of the cost reward of, pursuing life. And wow, the world changed. All the rules have changed now. All the opportunities are different. Things that my husband and I had the benefit of, my children that are adults now, they don't have those benefits. It's harder to connect with like mind and like kind and all that. So yeah, a lot of changes. So, and that's not so different through all of history. My younger son reminds me of this today. There's always going to be upheaval that everybody thinks is crazy, crazy, crazy. But yeah, this time I think we've hit that threshold here, to my knowledge, that this is pretty. Aside from Noah's flood, we're dealing with something global. So remember this when we talk about our expectation. Now, let's get into Abraham. Okay, we want to talk about him because that's what the portion covers today. Now, Abraham is one of the people of many I want to talk to if I had a choice on the park bench. That question. Oh, I want to talk to Abraham. Abraham is just fascinating, right? I'm so obsessed with Abraham. What's interesting about Abraham, besides 1,000 million things, is that he was told to leave his big list, his home, his family, everything he knew, right? And he was said, I'll take you to a place, I'll show you. That's basically all he's told. He doesn't know anything about this place that he'll be shown, but just that he'll be taken there. Massive act of trust, right? So he was told to leave without knowing where, by a God, that's like, I am, right? Which is interesting. What do I tell the people? I am. Okay. Now, from an attachment perspective, I just want to say just quickly, and I've said this before, just in case you're new, I just want to remind you, I believe I am is that definitive declarative statement of He is all. and you are safe because you are his. And to me, that completely encompasses that entire meaning of that name of I am. It's a verb. It's about what he'll do and what he is at the same time, because it's a verb and a noun. And wow, right? It's like incredible. And so in this portion, this is where God reveals himself to Abraham. And he does this 3 days after his circumcision. So that is so interesting. And we're going to like kind of nutshell what the portion is a bit. And I want to mention something about circumcision real quickly. Now, I'm not meaning to get graphic, and I mean, this is a G-rated show, but the Bible is not that G-rated because it's, general audiences, I think it is, G-rated because we are told to read it. And it covers things that a lot of people don't understand. I don't understand everything for sure, but I do think I understand from an attachment perspective the idea of circumcision. So without getting graphic, if you have children, maybe set them aside until you have this talk with them. And I'm not going to get graphic, but I'm going to just say that the idea of circumcision from an attachment perspective is that there's the blood covenant, that's the circle, and then the seed passes through the blood covenant, which is a promise that to Abraham's seed, which is everybody, right? The seed of Abraham, that this promise is offered to them, right? That this covenant is offered to each and every single person. That is very significant to me. Children are now circumcised on day 8. Now, I think he was 99. Abraham was 99, and this promise was made to his seed. The promise wasn't to him about him, except about his seed. Okay? So that to me is very fascinating, that ring of blood with the seed passing through it is the ultimate in I love every person on this planet. What a great message from I am, right? So 3 days after he's circumcised, and what he does, he rushes off to prepare a meal for 3 guests who appear in the heat of the day. Okay. So here's what that says. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre in the heat of the day, like the hottest part of the day, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. Okay, so we talked about earlier today, it's very hard to listen. So no, do you ever notice like you pray a lot and listen very little? I mean, do you hear that where a lot of people can do that or go through long spurts of that, or finally conquer that, or be conquering that, or admire people who don't do that, whatever. Having trouble listening is something common to man. It's something common. But we have to listen. And what I read here, I'm not just excited about the 3 visitors. I'm excited about Abraham. I'm really excited about him. It says he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. So in the hottest time in the desert, here's Abraham sitting at the entrance. Okay. That tells me something. It's hot. You're not going to maybe be out working. Yeah, that might be part of it. Thank you, Father, though, because it makes me sit. And it makes me, I don't have a TV, a CB radio even. I don't have a television. I don't have a computer. I don't have a smartphone. I'm sitting. But where is he sitting? At the entrance of his tent. So anytime you talk about the entrance to something, it makes me think of that mezuzah, right? That entrance, that threshold, crossing that threshold. Well, he was at the threshold. He was sitting there. This tells me there's an expectation. He wasn't just in the shade, napping, getting a good nap in during the heat of the day. He was at the entrance. So to me, that tells me there's an expectation. What was he expecting? Because he was sitting at the entrance of his tent and he looks up. Okay, he lifts his eyes and he sees 3 men standing nearby. And when he sees them, okay, so he was sitting there expecting something. When he sees them, he ran from the entrance of his tent. Very specifically, it says the entrance of the tent. The text goes out of its way to repeat that. To meet them. And he bows low to the ground. Now, a lot of people believe that these 3 men were actually angels in the form of men. That's what a lot of people think. The word angel means messenger. So no one's sure. But he was expecting a message. And he ran to greet this message at the entrance, at the threshold. So to me, that says not in the echo chamber of my own thoughts, but at the entrance where something I might not know or expect is going to approach me and I'm going to run to meet it. That's called listening. Okay. And it says in exactly 1 year, Sarah, who had dealt with infertility, we know the story with Hagar and all that, right? It says she's going to give birth to this son. And of course, Sarah is laughing at this, right? And then you keep reading, just keep reading. And here you have, where Abraham just begs the father to spare Sodom because it was full of wicked people. But he's like, please spare them, right? So you're seeing, this is like Moshe follows in the footsteps of Abraham as, that hospitality, give them a chance. Now, 2 of these messengers, they arrive at this city, right? They go to the city. And in that city, Abraham's nephew Lot was there. And of course, remember, he takes them in and he's going to, keep them safe and offer them shelter and protection from the, enormous evil group or enormous, mad, angry, mob of people. And then they, let the messengers, the messages say, hey, we're here to take you out. We're going to save, and protect and nudge Lot out and his family, of course. And this is where you see Lot's wife. She looks back. And then she becomes that memorial, that salt memorial. So if you've ever, there's a lot of different people. They believe she actually turned into a statue. I don't believe that she became a pillar of salt. The word there is memorial of salt, which in my personal view, a lot of people think these are all metaphors. I actually think this really happened. And I do believe there was some sort of evisceration of some sort of heat. And that was salt, that became, the bodies became salt. There's a lot of different people who teach on this. I think it's interesting. But she was told to keep going, right? Don't get eviscerated. And she didn't. She lingered back in the past, in the back, right? She wasn't moving forward. And so, of course, this happens. And the city's burning, and she was too close to that heat and became salt, which would be like the salt that's there to this day. So then it talks about Lot's daughters, right? So they're in this cavernous part of the rock, could be a cave. And a lot of the prevailing thought is this is just the prevailing thought is that they believe they were there was nobody else left in the world. It was just them. And they had to repopulate the earth or keep the earth going. You ever do that yourself? Think that you can keep this earth going. You can keep everything good. You have the power to do that. Well, they're just like everybody else. They think they have power they don't have, or that they shouldn't think they should go after, right? So what do? They conceived by their dad that they got drunk, disgusting, right? And It's not your job to keep this world going, people, right? It's not my job to keep this world going at all. The earth is the footstool of the Father. Our primary caregiver is completely adequate and more than adequate and perfect to keep everything going. We never have to walk outside of his commandments to do anything like that. That is never going to be our role. And a lot of people get a God complex, and most of us are not immune to at some point in our life thinking, it's our job or we have the ability. And this is where we just continue to remind ourselves we are not in control. We are not God. And so we never need to go against the commandments. Now, there are times we judiciously discern the weightier matter, right? Yes, we do. But disobeying the commandments is never safe, except when we are discerning the weightier matter. We're not disobeying the commandments, we're understanding the commandments, right? So that's lack of legalism, right? Legalism is an ism, right? So that's where we're taking something too far outside of its intended purpose. Okay. So now the sons that were born from this sinful union, which was not condoned by the Father, would be what came out of that is the nations of Moab and Ammon. So Ammon. So, but then it just goes on. It talks about Abraham presenting to Abimelech, right? So how he presents his wife Sarah as his sister because he was afraid he would get killed because she was so beautiful, and maybe they would just want to get him out of the picture so they could take her. And of course, what does God do? He didn't approach Abraham and say that was wrong. He actually approached the person that took her, and God intervened in the way he thought was best. And he told him. That is so interesting to me. If you don't think you know the end of this whole story and you just think about that, why would God approach Abimelech and not Abraham? Wouldn't Abraham need to make restitution for his actions, for lying and putting his wife in this position to be held captive as a wife when she was in love and married to him? Wouldn't that be his job to make restitution? But no, he says, Abimelech, you're going to die if you don't return Sarah to Abraham. And that's a message to me about, Abraham is like all the people, right? We don't know always how to manage the politics of this earth, right? We don't understand how to do it. It's like, well, I should choose life for my body. And so technically there was a sister relationship there with the way things were culturally at that time with birth and everything. What's the weightier matter? What do we do? How do I manage this? I'm afraid they're going to kill me. And then we'll never have that baby that we're promised. So I must have to do something to keep this dream alive that we're promised. Okay. Have you ever done that? Guilty. Weekly. I mean, right? We are always trying to work this out. But when we have the politics of power, and you know what I mean, we're going through that now, right? Power, right? So we have this idea of Abraham being spared having to do that. They're like, why didn't you just tell me? Here, go. Just take your wife back. So the Father restored that marriage. He restored Sarah back to her husband. And he did that. Abraham didn't do that. The Father did that. The Father was putting together Abraham's life the way it needed to be so he could walk into his destiny despite his humanity, his failures, his problems, because we were born to be human and not born to be gods, right? We weren't born to be like God. We don't know. We're not as brave as God. We're not as strong as God. We don't know. We're not going to handle all this really well. These constant power struggles with people, like we have power struggles with people. You ever notice that that's just it's so hard to deal with people. It's like, am I being too hard on this person? Am I letting them walk on me? What does that mean? How do I deal with this? Like, how do I reapproach and say, listen, I really want to be in a relationship with you, but not if you're dominant and I'm subservient, or vice versa, or whatever. We have to recognize our healthy relationships, or relationships we're always having to sort things out. The politics of life is really hard. And Abraham it was hard then, and it's hard now. So just like my younger son said, there's nothing new under the sun, Mom. Everything that's happening now on some level is just what it is. But let's go on. But he remembers the father acts on, right, that promise. And of course, they have Isaac, which means will laugh. And of course, when he's 8 days old, which is the number of infinity and eternity in Yeshua, right? He's circumcised. And you actually can look this up, but your clotting factors are highest on day 8. So I just think that's really, really interesting. That's a thing I've read a bunch of medical stuff on that. The Father is just so prepared to provide, right, for everything he asks us to do. And this is when Abraham is, he's like 100 or something. I think Sarah is like 90 when that child's born, right? And then we go through the binding of Isaac. We deal with the whole Akia, the whole idea of the binding of Isaac. So what's interesting here, and I want to just focus on expectation, is it talks about how, now a lot of people just picture this genocidal God just saying, take your cute little son and just bind him up, tie him up, and just, provide him as an olam, like just kill this kid. When most people, and the prevailing thought is, that Isaac was a full-grown man, in his 30s, and was willing. Now, was he willing to die? Now, here's 2 ways this can be looked at. And it's all about expectation and attachment. Now, Abraham was clearly attached to the father. He made a mistake with Sarah, so he thought and didn't know or whatever, but the father made it better. So our primary caregiver is designed and supposed to meet our needs. And one of the principles of attachment is that we depend more on our caregiver than on ourselves when they are the powerful one. So this would be a parent-child relationship where we trust our caregiver to meet our needs. And when our caregiver does not meet our needs, this is an attachment wound. Now, Abraham did not have an attachment wound with the father because the father never left him nor forsake him, and they will never do that to you. Never. But the idea of Isaac, he was promised a child, and that there would be children that would come from that child, that particular child, that Abraham would have this child, and this child would be also the father, one of the patriarchs of the nation that would come from him. So Abraham knows, okay, so you're telling me, now this is what's interesting, okay, and I'm not reading it word for word. We don't have time. I wish we did, but read it yourself. It talks about how he takes Isaac, and Isaac and him are going up. And of course, that's another metaphor, going up, right? You go up to Israel, up to Jerusalem. The idea here is that he lifted his eyes after 3 days. So I want to talk about that really quickly. We keep reading about lifting their eyes. I'm going to talk about where we first encountered this concept and what I think it means and why I think it's so important. I'm not going into word studies for months. I don't feel like right now that's what we need to be doing. But this one thing is an important concept. So he, of course, goes up, and There's two ways to look at this. That he said, yeah, I will kill Isaac, and the Father will rise him from the dead because he promised a nation from the loins of Isaac. Or he'll stop me in time. Some people believe you don't hear from Sarah again in the Bible at all because she died with worry that her husband would make a big mistake like he did with her. There's some people that believe that, and that might be true. I don't know. But the idea here is that he's there, and on the third day, he lifts up his eyes. And what does that tell me? That tells me he had an expectation. If you're fully and properly attached to your parent, and somebody says, I think your dad robbed a bank, your expectation is that you must have the wrong, person with my dad's name. That doesn't even compute in my expectation of my dad. Well, that's how Abraham was, I believe. The Father had spoken to him, revealed himself to him as I am, and wanted the people to know he was I am. And what did he expect? That whatever happens, the Father is going to make it work. So I have no fear or doubt of showing up. So yes, that's a great papa, right? That is right. That's why, I am the daughter of Abraham and Sarah, right? Because that's papa, right? Because he, like the Father said, you weren't, afraid to trust me with your son. That's amazing about that level of attachment that he had, that trust he had in the Father. And so lifting his eyes is really about expectation. But the meaning of that shifts depending on the subject. Meaning, is it us or God? Now, here's what I want to say about that. Oh my gosh, we're almost done. But it's about what are we expecting? And I'm telling myself this. I'm not having a great day today. So, what do we expect? What are we expecting? The first time you see lifting the eyes, okay? It's in Genesis 4:13. And it says, it's great. My punishment is too great to bear. That would be Cain, right? I can't shoulder this heavy punishment. And of course, the Father makes accommodations and still maintains his position. Good dad, right? So this person just couldn't bear it. That word was about bearing. So it's when you lift your eyes, it's like an expectation. What can I handle? Well, he looked up his eyes and he could handle it. So Abraham lifted his eyes and he could handle this because he saw, I believe personally, I believe he saw the ultimate Yeshua moment and knew 3 is always the number of resurrection, or often that's the number of resurrection. And any way you ever look at 3, whether it's the 3 parts of the cord that can't be broken, right? This is resurrection. This is top of the line, right? I'm sorry, that's that lawnmower. I hope that's not loud. But what about, boy, that is loud. Let's look at Genesis 7:17, because this is where we're going to see about lifting the eyes again. Now, in this case, that word is used, and it's about lifting the ark. It says, as the water increased, it lifted the ark. So the water was capable of lifting the ark, of bearing this vessel of salvation. It was designed. The water came and it provided lift for that ark, for that vessel of those 8 people, that number of infinity, right? The number of eternity. That is a message of hope if there ever was one. I mean, just that. So the ark rose. Now we see In Genesis 13:6, we see this concept again about how the land could not bear or sustain Abraham and Lot. So this is where Lot and Abraham go separate ways. So it couldn't bear it. The land itself couldn't maintain these two households. And then in Genesis 13:10, you'll see it. And this is where he gets to choose. Abraham says, pick where you want to live. And Lot lifts up his eyes. So he invokes his expectation that there'll be good stuff for him because he knows Abraham, his uncle, is good and generous. And he takes this beautiful watered area, right? Ends up not becoming such a great place. And then let's see, that was Genesis 3:10. And then in 3:14, it says, now it is again, lift up your eyes. And then they were separated, right? Where they were separated. And now he says to Abraham, you lift your eyes. You invoke your expectation. And then in Genesis 18:2, when he lifts up his eyes and he looks. So he lifts his eyes and he looks. So you could see he invoked his expectation, right? Where he lifted and looked. And he talks about sparing the place, to spare something. That word, to lift your eyes, also means to spare something. But it's all the same concept. It's all about your expectation. Spare. My expectation. What is his expectation? Is what you can bear. Your expectation is about what you can bear, what you can manage. What is my expectation? Well, it does say the Father doesn't give you more than you can handle, but it doesn't say man won't, right? The Father himself will never ask you to do things you can't do, but people will. And people have free will, and that's part of the deal. That's the way this earth was made, so that true attachment could form. Free will, free agency, the ability to walk away, the ability to say no. And so when you look, you keep going. Genesis 18:26. Then I will spare this whole city. Sorry about the loud voices there. So now when people lift their eyes, it's really to describe their expectation or to invoke their expectation about what they can bear, what they are expecting, what they think is going to happen based on their relationship with the Father. When God does it, it's about shouldering something heavy. Now, that's an attachment principle. Like a child is always expecting the parent to take care of them, and the parent is always expecting themselves to shoulder anything that would prevent them, that would hurt the child, actually harm the child. So the parent's going to bear all the brunt of the world to protect this child. You go to Genesis 19:21, and it's about granting. I've accepted. My expectation is I will bear this for you. Your expectation is that I will bear this for you. This is a massive attachment principle because the idea of the stronger taking care of the weaker is where everybody plays their role. And it's a big oath promise of trust that's not fractured. So you see in Genesis 21:16, it talks about lifted up her voice, right? Her voice invoked and showed that expectation. Go ahead and read that. I wish I had more time to go through all this, but here's where actually, if we go into Genesis 21:18, arise, lift up the lad and hold him up, lift him up. So, I mean, demonstrate your expectation. What would the expectation be? Not that you're killing him. Your expectation is that I will be saving him. Lift him up. Show me your expectation of me. Demonstrate to me what you expect of me. Not like a mean way, like I'm going to see if you trust me. I'm going to push you off into the deep end and suddenly you're going to get to swim. It's not like that. It's like, arise, lift up the lad. Okay, but then we go to Genesis 22:4, then this is on that third day I mentioned where Abraham raised his eyes. Abraham invoked his expectation of the father of what he expected. And then actually in 22:13, it's he lifts his eyes. He gets stopped from the slicing him to be able to burn him, right? And then what does he do? He lifts his eyes, he invokes his expectation, and there's a ram. So yes, he was found to be, his expectation was found to be accurate. He didn't know what it would be, what it would look like, and what form it would take, and it took the form of a ram in the thicket, caught in the thicket. He invoked his expectation, he lifted his eyes, he trusted his father, and there's that messenger of everything's okay. Genesis 24:63 is where we see Isaac doing this. Isaac learned from his father about who God is. He learned from God. He learned from that moment the ram showed up that he could trust God. The patriarchs trusted God, right? And here, let me read this. Actually, 24. Let me start in verse 62. Now, Isaac had just returned from his trip, right, where he was looking, going to look for his wife. He was living in the Negev. Been there, love it. Love that I've been there. Early in the evening, Isaac went out to the field to meditate. So what does that tell us? And I did a show on this. I think it's called The Camels Are Coming or something like that. And he goes out to listen. He goes out to listen and lifts his eyes, which invokes his expectation that the father will do what is right. He saw the camels approaching. And then when Rebecca, who was, the one that watered the camels, right, looks up and sees Isaac, and, she lifted her voice, right? So you can just keep going in these expectations. You can see these people all had this expectation of a good thing. She looks up, she sees Isaac, she gets down from her camel, of course, and bows low, whatever. You keep getting this idea of this being invoked. And it says Rebecca lifts her eyes. What's that scripture is 24:64. So Rebecca lifts up her eyes, invokes her expectation. And then it talks about, then we get to Genesis 27. It keeps going further about, and you just keep getting these different things, which I think Esau lifts his voice, right? He demonstrates his expectation of what he's doing. And it keeps going. Then it goes on to Jacob about him going on his journey, which is an expectation that this would be a journey he is supposed to be on. This idea of lifting up your eyes is so much more important than we ever think. In Rachel, just keep going. You can find all the occurrences of this concept of expectation. Expectation is attachment. Expectation tells me everything about your attachment. What do you expect from your parent? That tells me how attached or unattached you are, or what attachment wounds you have. What do you expect your parents doing? Now, a lot of really good parents have a lot of really good kids that think their parents are from a different generation and a different mindset, and they might not see the world the same. And that doesn't mean you're not attached. It doesn't mean there's not love or trust, or when the chips are down, you don't know that your mom and dad are going to be there for you, or whatever. Your kids love you or whatever. It doesn't mean you're unattached. It might mean you have misunderstandings. It might mean you have a different worldview. It might mean you understand things differently because they came of age at a whole different generation with a whole different set of expectations of what things look like than you did. So don't confuse all this with, oh, we don't have a good safe attachment. The idea is, how do you come back from these conversations where you're like, I think you're mischaracterizing me. I didn't mean that. That's not what I think. And you don't know me as well as you think you do. Stop just answering your own questions about me. Ask me, believe what I say, because I'll tell you the truth, and form your expectation around information that you're given. Get curious about me. These are attachment principles. We have to get curious about people. We don't know what they're thinking. We think we do, And we think the history dictates the whole future. Yes, sometimes, yes, we use wisdom and say in the past, this has been the way it's been. This is probably the way it's going to be in the future. And many times we are not wrong in thinking that. That's actually a very smart way to live and to look at life, is based on the fruit you've seen. But never discount that there's always room for the expectation of transformation, right? In us and in others. The future begins now. We can transform now. With this word, I believe we can transform now. So how am I going to lift my eyes during this time where every time I lift my eyes, I see something that's either scary or challenging or divisive or misunderstood? Okay. What it is, it's not so much that you're lifting your eyes at what you're looking at. It's lifting your eyes up to what you're looking for, which is the Father's ultimate restoration. And that is what I need to remember to lift my eyes to. The restoration of all things. We lift our eyes with the expectation that our primary caregiver has this whole thing under control. He knows my birthday. He knows my address. He knows what date it is. He knows what's happening everywhere. But he is in control. And I can lift my eyes. I can invoke my expectation that my Father's good. Even when I read things that completely challenge everything I think the way things should be. Sometimes we're not understanding the way something's worded. Sometimes there's a concept there that's just too bizarre to even understand. There's a lot of different things going on with the Bible. I don't need to advocate for God because he's quite more than capable to advocate for himself. But I will say, I love advocating for God. I love it. I love telling people how great my dad is because he is that great. My Father, my God in heaven, my one and only God, right? We are monotheists. We love one God, and he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we lift our eyes, we invoke our expectation of I am. And if he is I am, I can walk and follow and be okay with that. I am going to cry sometimes, though. I don't understand this world. I don't get what's happening. It's weird. And so I'm not going to always do well. I'm going to have really long, terrible, terrible nights, and so are you. And if you're not in that place right now, yeah, good for you. But if you are, good for you. That's where you are. You're going through a range of emotions as things are really difficult right now. And it's okay not to be okay. That does not mean that you're doing anything wrong if you're really not feeling like all your expectations are being satisfied every minute. Sometimes we're going to go through like grief for what we lift our eyes and we don't see what we thought we would see. Sometimes it's better. And sometimes, even though it is ultimately better, it doesn't look better. It just looks scary and unknown. And we're like Abraham, leave everything you knew and go to some other place. He didn't even ask, like, what kind of place? Like, what's it like? How do I pack, tropical or winter? Like, he never even asked a single question. He's like, okay. And he just went. So Abraham, he didn't have a Bible. He didn't know how this was going to end, but he knew, he lifted his eyes. He had his expectations set about what would happen would be good. And that's why he walked that mountain with his son, and his son walked with him willingly, because they knew, they had lifted their eyes and they knew. They didn't know how or what it would look like, but the father was going to do the right thing as a dad. And he did. He did the right thing. And I hope this was encouraging to you. It's encouraging to me. I needed it today. My expectations are struggling. What is it supposed to look like? Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? If you don't know that, good. That means you're not a know-it-all. Are you sick of know-it-alls? Because I am. I'm going through a purging of that. And at the same time, I love all the people. And I know that sometimes people go through these phases of being know-it-alls because they're just feeling so insecure in their own attachment to the Lord. And they don't mean it that way. They don't mean to be that way. And so sometimes we just need to have grace and patience. And sometimes we have grace and patience for too long and the relationship becomes set in that way. And then you've got some work to do to unravel these things. Expectations really are the curators of everything. What you're expecting is oftentimes going to be what's going to give you that passive, relaxed, I can trust in the Lord feeling, or that anxious, terrified, I have to control everything feeling. And I think as human beings, we vacillate between the two, right? And we, on that spectrum, you know, I think that, we travel through this arc of just trying to find that place of my eyes are lifted up in peace, no matter what carnage it looks like from here. So the idea is that we trust our primary caregiver and that we know we can, and he's never let us down. And in the world to come, and I love this, guys, look forward to the debrief. I really do. I look forward to being with you as we just get the debrief and like, this is what was going on and this is what was said and this is how this was good for you or what it was meant to be or how the Father grieved over these things, because he grieves, right? The Messiah grieved. The earth is groaning and I'm groaning, right? You can feel like the groaning of the earth. You can just feel the sadness and the melancholy and the hope and the transformation and all of the different bondings, right? Because Abraham rushed to make a meal for the messengers. He expected a good message and he wanted to bond over food, which is part of that ancient Near Eastern custom, right? The ancient Near East, that was a ritual. That was a covenant thing. Learn from Rico about that. He's really, really good at teaching these covenant aspects of covenant. And, Dina died, different people. But anyway, I want to just lift my eyes, and my expectation is one that I know when I lift my eyes at you, I see a person the Father loves. So call me a prophet and I will answer. But that's what I know, is that when I lift my eyes to look where you are, whoever you are, wherever you are, the Father loves you. And I don't know what it looks like for you to be healed. I don't know what it looks like for you to be transformed. I don't even know what it looks like for me to be those things yet. I'm still just kind of at the entrance of the tent, at the threshold, listening, waiting, looking for camels, waiting for messengers, standing in front of a fire I built with everything I love laid on it, with the knife, knowing something's going to fix this. That's my expectation. I need to lift my eyes. We have to lift our eyes. We have to lift our eyes and invoke our expectation. And may that always be based in trust of the Father. I pray that this message would be, received with love and just you can understand that we can trust the Father. In the midst of our grief, we can trust the Father. So the future begins now. Lift your eyes, invoke your expectation, and be honest with yourself about what the expectation is. If your expectation is that you can't trust the Father, be honest with him and tell him. He will fix it. Okay? He knows how to fix it. He is your answer. And so I really just pray that you that this touched your heart in some way, and that your eyes are lifted, and that your expectation is all about the truth. And until next time, see you later. Bye-bye.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.